Vitamin D that's added back in because the pasteurization and homogenization process actually kills all the natural nutrients. If a calf had to live off, if we took the same milk that came out of mama cow, pasteurized it, gave it back to baby calf, you'd kill the calf.
Really?
Absolutely.
Oh my goodness.
That calf would be absolutely void of nutrients.
I've seen more and more children over the years get more and more sensitive with allergies, asthma, eczema, more peanut allergies than you can ever imagine, and I don't even know why. We can guess. And one of the ways that I can help these kids is to put them on a nutrient-dense whole foods diet. Very educated people have come to the same conclusions, that we need whole, real foods, and in particular, raw milk is a miracle. I mean, Mark mentioned a few things, but we now know that I have always wondered, why is there all this calcium in the milk and presumably it doesn't get into the bones? Well, we actually know why. It's the factor that carries it into the bones is of kind of vitamin K that's in the fatty layer that is heat sensitive. When we boil it, we kill it, so the calcium's there, but it can't go into the bones, and pasteurized milk actually leaches calcium from the bones. Huge. We actually put newborns on raw milk. Sally has a wonderful raw milk formula, not that difficult to make, and we have mothers who either can't nurse or their babies are adopted, and they all do great on it. I haven't had anybody allergic to a raw milk formula. And it goes on and on and on and on and on.
You have to be careful about what you feed your animals. There are a lot of very delicate components in raw milk that are easily damaged by heat. It's the stuff that makes raw milk such an incredibly healing food. When you start using the excuse that we need to get rid of pathogens with heat or the pasteurization process, what you're doing is you're essentially throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You don't want to deal with the symptoms. You want to deal with the cause. What is the cause? Why does raw milk get contaminated? It's because you're feeding the cows these horrible foods. You're feeding them too much grain, too much soy. Soy has an ability to mimic estrogen, so it causes the cows to lactate more. That can be helpful to the farmer who wants to produce more milk, but you can also cause the animal to get mastitis, and that's essentially an inflammation of the teats. So what does that do? It throws pus into the milk. It's disgusting. So it needs to be pasteurized. That's the kind of milk you don't want to drink raw.
Away from them. Really don't understand how Mother Nature works. We've become so germ phobic and don't understand our connectedness to everything. I mean, the system, and we really don't understand the system. Our children are being educated in the wrong manner. They really don't understand how the biology of the planet works. So it's more fear-based than money-based, I think, when you get into people's hearts. They really don't understand. I think there's a whole revamping of our educational system and our understanding of the germ theory. I mean, it goes way back. It goes back hundreds of years. Clinical stories. So one of my medical partners just had a baby 4 months ago, and she had a difficult pregnancy, a lot of vomiting and nausea, and really all she could drink consistently was raw milk, which she got from our local cow share, and the milk is delivered right to our office, and now her baby is 4 months old, and she continues to drink her raw milk, and everybody's happy and healthy. So we're really not afraid of raw milk. We love raw milk around our place, and we only see good things happening from it.
I have a question.
They even wanted to feed sewage to cows one time.
It had protein.
It had protein.
It had protein.
You know, why not melamine? I mean, I don't know. But anyway, so yeah, it's really important. What goes into the cow is what you can expect out of it. So you have to know to ask for grass-fed milk. That's what cows, through the millions of years of evolution, were designed to eat. When cows are confined in areas where the wintertime covers the ground with snow, they can't migrate like they used to do. You know, there are these mass migrations. The bison used to do that, the buffalo. Well, cows are stuck in there, so it depends on what the farmers decide to feed them. If they feed them silage, dried hay, things of that sort, that's okay, but they start packing on the grain, and that starts changing the conditions in the cow's rumen. The acidity changes, and then the quality of the nutrients that go into the milk also get compromised. So So there are a number of variables that come into what a cow eats that really, really, really are crucial to what the cow puts out.
My mom's was having trouble losing her post-pregnancy weight, her baby weight, and I told her to drink full-fat raw milk, and she came back the next time and told me that she'd lost all of her weight. I thought that was cute. I really feel that food is medicine, and our children from preconception on are really exposed to foods that are not nutrient dense and that are processed, and they're born into an environment that's really more sterile than it should be, and we're not being fully colonized by the good bacteria all over our bodies, not just in our gut. And what we're seeing then really early is more reflux, babies vomiting with stomach problems and eczema, and then they go on, especially if they get antibiotics early, which the little bit of colonization they got, it destroys it. And if they're not being recolonized by the good foods from the environment, they have a sterile body and an immune system which really is based in the gut that doesn't allow them to interact with the world properly. I think that's really what allergies are, is being too sensitive to interact in a world that we should be able to dance with, and instead we're too separate because we're keeping ourselves too clean. So it's kind of everything's connected. We're back to those permaculture principles and the system, and we're not separate from the system.
Earth. But if you go back, whether you pick 300 years or 5,000 or 10,000 years, mankind recognized something. Sun shines down on the earth, grass grows. We can't eat the grass, we have one stomach. Cows eat grass, they have 4 stomachs. They have a digestive process that can ferment this food, this grass, sunshine, into things we can't eat, like beef, butter, milk, cream, cheese, all these things that come from a cow. Or a goat, or a sheep, or a horse, or a musk ox, or a giraffe, or anything that was milked by mankind. And believe me, lots of species were milked by man, not just cows. And if you go back, let's say 200 years ago, and so we're talking about hairbreadth of time in all time, the last 200 years, and you throw that away, you would beg for a goat or a cow because that would be the animal that kept you from having to hunt to be able to eat. You could save forage and pile it up in a barn or in a stack and give it to the cow over the wintertime, and you'd always have something to eat. You'd have butter, cream, cheese, and if you got really hungry, you'd kill the cow. And the cow always had a calf. So
eventually you're going to have to end it because cows don't produce forever.
Right.
There's a certain life
expectancy. They get bred, the bulls.
Yeah.
So the bottom line is that you go back a while, and not all cultures of people drank raw milk at all. But you did see all people eat what was in raw milk, which is the good fats from grass-fed or fish-fed sources, the minerals found in grass-fed raw milk was also found in other foods, natural raw foods. The good biodiversity of bacteria was found in that, and also enzymes. So those things were found in every culture around the world, regardless if they drank raw milk or not. Raw milk, just a very, very convenient carrier for those things, found in all indigenous cultures' diets prior to 200 years ago. So when you drink raw milk, you get good bacteria, lots of enzymes, minerals, and good fats when the cows are grass-fed, not grain-fed. And so it's very interesting that when people start talking about, well, milk is just for cows.
Baby cows, right.
Well, I'll tell you what, it was also for starving humans that figured out that they didn't have to hunt anymore because they could get the cow to eat the grass and take the cow with them when they moved, and they always had food. There wasn't a Conestoga wagon that didn't come across this country that didn't have 2 or 3 cows behind it. And in Jamestown, 1636, everybody was dying until the arrival of the first 100 cows from England. And that was when Americans started to thrive, was the stock exchange. Literally, it wasn't paper, it wasn't money, it wasn't gold. It was 4-legged animals that produced milk for us.
That was in Chicago.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
So literally, we've forgotten our great-great-grandparents and the fact they survived on the fact that there was a local dairy, literally, yards or a mile or 2 from, because there was dairies everywhere. Everybody had 5, 10 cows. Because it sustained them. It created cheese, it created whey to ferment beef and vegetables. Everything was lacto-fermented. You didn't have pasteurization. You didn't have cold chilling ice chests to hold things. You lacto-fermented things. You had cultured products. And milk and sheep and butter and all these things that came from goats and various different mammals actually sustained mankind when no other foods could. And it signaled a change from a a hunting mentality to a community-based mentality where we didn't have to hunt anymore because we had milk that was, or food, whole food, that was created in a community fashion that allows us not to have to go hunt and sometimes be eaten by those that we hunted. So it's civilized man to have domesticated animals. So man's brilliance was, was
thank you for
probably
your
part of
answer
it,
to
so
that.
that's my answer.
Yeah, and one of the things that it reminded me of is that in about 1950 or so, Ansel Keys was one of the key investigators who was responsible for developing this fear of fat and saturated fat.
Right.
And you know, I think there's an emerging group of experts now who recognize the fallacy of that belief system. And you know, many enlightened clinicians now understand that fat is healthy for you. And actually,
Especially good fats.
Good fats,
Good fats.
which you get from grass-fed dairy. And actually, although the milk protein is a challenge for me, I can have pretty much unlimited quantities of butter.
Butter, right.
Which
right.
is
it's casein-free.
casein-free.
There's
There's
the
very little proteins in there.
Right.
But and actually, I understand it takes 25 gallons of milk to make a gallon of butter?
Not gallons. It takes about 11 gallons of milk, which is 100 pounds.
100 pounds.
Let's,
So
look at,
100
let's talk
pounds
in
of-
terms of pounds.
Okay.
100 pounds of milk, which is 11.6 gallons of milk, to make 4 pounds of butter.
Okay.
So there's a tremendous amount of skim milk created that nobody really wants because they're good fats where it's at, they say nowadays. And that's the fish oil fats, the high omega-3s, low 6s, the CLAs. Those are the wonderful fats that actually drop your CRP, your C-reactive proteins, the inflammation in your body, which is so key to the cholesterol misbehaving and plaquing. Those are the good fats, the fish oil type fats that are found from grass-fed raw milk fats.
Well, and there's a
are so
specific fat
powerful.
called CLA,
Yeah.
conjugated linoleic acid, which we actually sell as a supplement. But the first recommendation we have when I have that page to inform people about it is to actually go for the butter, because
got it.
in a tablespoon or two of butter, there's as much CLA as is one of our supplements.
Right.
But it has to be grass-fed.
Right, not grain-fed.
Yeah, because
grass-fed.
it's not in grain-fed butter.
Correct. The levels are
And
so low, it's just irrelevant
Yeah.
versus high for grass. Exactly.
Now,
There's no question. There are two kinds of raw milk in America, and there's always been, for the last 200 years at least, two kinds of raw milk in America. And the beginnings of the raw milk issue in
and
the
you
United
say
States.
200 years because prior to 200 years all milk was raw.
Yeah.
So
Well, actually, pasteurization began around 1893 or so,
Okay.
with parboiling starting. But it was interesting because in the late 1700s, early 1800s, people started moving to the cities. And when they went to move to the cities, they brought their cows and their goats with them. And that worked out okay until the Boston Commons got ate down to nothing, became a muddy mess. And then in 1812, there was a kind of a blockade against Jamaica. We couldn't get rum in the United States, and we wanted our rum. And so these brewery, distillery dairies started to pop up in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Chicago. And distillers' grains were being fed to these cows that had been brought into the city with the city dwellers. And it was a cheap feed, and the cows would produce milk. But the problem was cows had never eaten distillers' swill and became
which is
sick.
mostly grain.
Yeah, grain, thank you. It changed their gut physiology. Didn't have flushing toilets, no hot water, no chlorines, no flushing toilets. The people that were milking the cows were milking the cows by hand, and they were newcomers through Ellis Island and were not the rich and the healthy, but the poor and the sick. And they were carrying tuberculosis, brucellosis, typhoid was rampant. On a cold morning, people would put their feet in the milk to keep them warm when they were milking the cow. Filthy conditions. These conditions were ripe for some kind of a solution. And in
It's a
1890
public health menace.
it was terrible. 50% of the people that drank this swill milk died. It was a torment. In fact, it was called the milk problem at the time. And historians lament about this horrible problem, about this swill milk. And so 1893, a guy by the name of Coit developed the other milk, the American Association of Medical Milk Commissions, the certified milk, and determined that doctors should prescribe raw milk that comes from clean dairies, grass-fed, sunshine dairies with sanitary practices and low bacteria counts. And that milk was best for babies because it was a mirror image of breast milk, and children thrived on breast milk. So you had two kinds of raw milk in America, and it was a disaster of the really filthy milk in the 1880s that caused this kind of divergence of the two kinds of raw milk. Because raw milk intended for human consumption and clean has always been there for 30,000 years, but had a real disaster for 150 years or so as industrialization and accumulation of civilians in a small, citizens in a small area, and cows not eating the right proper foods kind of caused this disaster. So pasteurization kind of helped this disaster get better, but still had a lot of problems until the 1920s when they could actually figure out what pasteurization was all about. But then you had two kinds of milk. You had pasteurized milk which came from many dairies put together, and it was rendered, quote, safe by heating. And then you had clean raw milk, which is a local food, which has always been safe when it was raised in grass pastures, and one farmer took complete responsibility for it.
Terrific. So,
no hormones involved with these cow production. You know, all the organic standards are prevailing in terms of the production. And so it's a completely natural environment. And the cows live 4 times longer because of it. They put out less milk, but the milk value and quality is much higher. I mean, you got different kinds of butterfat. The omega-3, omega-6 fatty acid ratios are different. The CLA values are different. It's just an entirely different milk. It's a natural milk. And we find most dramatically, most excitingly, is that when you go natural like this, and you put the cow in a green grass pasture, you never find pathogens. And pathogens are disease-causing organisms for human beings. Bad bugs. You never find them. They're just not there.
Are the cows themselves just healthier?
They're healthier, but their physiology has changed. The rumen is a completely different environment when you don't have antibiotics. Antibiotics are an indiscriminate shotgun on the body. They go in and they're intended to kill a particular pathogen, let's say, that's making a disease process occur, let's say, causing an infection in the uterus or something, or not the uterus, but the udder. Mastitis. Well, it doesn't just go after that infection. It goes after every bacteria in the entire body. And what is a cow? A cow is a living organism with a big digestive tract that is a fermentation vat, is what it is. A fermentation takes place because of bacteria and temperature, warmth. Well, guess what? You're going to knock out those bacterium with antibiotics. So the digestive tract completely goes to shreds when you give a cow antibiotics. So you feed them a lot of grain, a lot of antibiotics, you put them in a place where there's no green grass, and you start seeing pathogens in their manure, and lots of pathogens. In fact, the UC Davis studies have found that 31% of the milk tanks that were tested in the last few years showed that they had a human pathogen present in the raw manure, excuse me, in the raw milk from these cows, and that came from the raw manure on these dairies that use all these conventional factory farm practices. When our manure was tested, not one single solitary human pathogen was found in the herd when they tested the fresh raw manure.
Let me assure you that absolutely nothing that I'm going to tell you is exaggerated, is interpolated, or is imagined. Everything I'm going to tell you is documented. He who controls food controls the world. Well, they said in 1962, we're going to work toward total global implementation of Codex Alimentarius on December 31st, 2009. They were sort of guidelines. Now, Codex Alimentarius Commission is administered by the World Health Organization, WHO, and the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization. They fund Codex and they run it at the request of the UN. So they're mommy and daddy to Codex Alimentarius. In 1994, Codex, with no notice here in this country whatsoever, declared nutrients, put on your intellectual seatbelts, declared nutrients to be toxins. They're poisons. Under Codex, every dairy cow on the planet must be treated with Monsanto's recombinant bovine growth hormone. Furthermore, under Codex, every animal used for food on the planet must be treated with subclinical antibiotics and must be treated with exogenous growth hormones. If you do the numbers in the WHO FAO projections, the epidemiological projections, they estimate, not I, that just the vitamin and mineral guideline alone, when it goes into global implementation on December 31st, 2009, will result in a minimum of 3 billion, that's B, bad, big, billion deaths. 1 billion through simple starvation. Those folks who die are not particularly economically successful from the point of view of the corporations. But the next 2 billion, they will die from the preventable diseases of undernutrition. Who will live? Probably those people who are wealthy enough and powerful enough to have their own pushers of clean food and nutrients. Who will live? Probably those people who are wealthy enough and powerful enough to have their own pushers of clean food and nutrients.
Research, Dr. Weston Price. Dr. Price was a dentist, actually. His practice was in Cleveland, Ohio. He was a very successful dentist for his day. And he had a lot of patients who asked him, what is a healthy diet? How can I be healthier? And Dr. Price did not know the answer to this question. What he did know is that he was seeing increasing levels of disease among his patients. Dental caries, cavities, infection in the mouth, and also what he referred to as dental deformities. We have a different way of saying that. We say crooked teeth, crowded teeth. But he was seeing all sorts of problems in the development of the jaw and the teeth. And what he noticed and what he observed was that people who had poor dental health, people who had cavities, who had infection, people who had crowded and crooked teeth and overbites, generally had poor overall health. The teeth were a mirror to the rest of the body. And he was concerned because it seemed like the health of the American population was deteriorating and getting worse and worse, at least based on what he was seeing in his practice. Now, this was a time back in the 30s, and actually this was the early 20s when he started his practice, when the world was opening up. There were sections of the globe that had been discovered and isolated populations described and photographed. And one of the most common observations that Westerners had when they discovered these isolated people was what beautiful teeth they had. Even the first settlers to America described in their diaries the Native Americans as having teeth broad and straight and white as piano keys. And this intrigued Dr. Price very much because this is not what he was seeing in his practice. He was seeing decay. He was seeing blackened, crooked, unattractive teeth. Well, Dr. Price decided that he was going to see for himself whether these reports were true. And so he embarked on a series of investigations that took him 10 years to complete and took him to many isolated parts of the globe in order to answer two questions. The first question was it true? Was it true that isolated people living far from all the so-called benefits of civilization had excellent dental health? They did not suffer from cavities. They did not have dental deformities. And by inference, if they had good dental health, good overall health. The second question was, if he could find these healthy populations, what were they eating? What was the type of diet that supported this kind of health? He was not interested in what unhealthy people were eating. He knew what unhealthy people were eating. He knew what his patients were eating. But he didn't know what to tell them to eat to be healthy. So that was the genius of Dr. Price. He asked the right questions, and then he very systematically went about answering those questions. The first place that Dr. Price went was an isolated valley in Switzerland. Switzerland at this time in the early 1930s had embarked on a road building project to connect all the villages and all the towns in Switzerland. But he found a few villages that were still not connected to the road. This particular village was in the Lowenschel Valley. This village was at the end of a valley surrounded by very steep mountain ranges. And the only access to this village was a footpath too narrow for a wheeled cart. That way he was assured that the foods that they were eating, they grew there in the village for themselves, with the exception of salt, which was carried in. They did not have salt. Now, when he came to a tribe or a village, the way he worked was he sat down with the elders and with the help of an interpreter, he explained his research. And when he had their permission, he then took every individual from the village, young and old, sick, no exceptions. He wasn't leaving out people deliberately. And he lined them all up, and then he very carefully looked in every single mouth and meticulously counted cavities. And that part of his research, he kept little notebooks. It was very precise and scientific. And every child, every individual in the village had naturally straight teeth. No one needed braces. There were no dental deformities. He described the children's faces as broad. Their nostrils were broad, had very good facial construction. They were also very sturdy. They played barefooted in the freezing water of the running streams during weather in which he and his wife had to wear heavy overcoats. The Price Pottinger Nutrition Foundation has just released another photograph from Switzerland, and you can see how round the children's faces are. Very good facial development, allowing plenty of space in the jaw for the teeth to come in straight. By the way, the children did not brush their teeth. They didn't have toothpaste, they didn't have fluoride treatments. In fact, he very delicately described their teeth as being covered with green slime, but they were not decayed. He also, of course, looked at the adults, and he found the same situation in the adults. Virtually no tooth decay and no dental deformities, very straight teeth. The men in the village were known for their great strength. They routinely won the athletic contests held throughout Switzerland, and the women were known for their great beauty from this particular village. When he talked to the health officials in Switzerland, he learned from them that there had never been a case of tuberculosis in these few isolated Swiss villages. And this was a time when tuberculosis was a huge problem in the rest of Switzerland. It was the #1 killer, not only in Switzerland, but throughout Europe. But these people seem to be completely immune to tuberculosis. So here we are in the Swiss village, the first place that he visited, with his first question: could he find a healthy population? And he's answered this question with a yes. He's found a population with excellent dental health, from all he can determine, excellent overall health. So we go now to the next question: what were these people eating? The #1 source of calories in the Swiss village was the very food accused of causing tuberculosis in the rest of the world. It was raw milk. Real milk is milk that has all the fat, that comes from cows on pasture, eating the food appropriate to cows. And we've talked about the fat and the pasture feeding. We know why these are important. But the third component of real milk is that it's unprocessed, that has not been pasteurized, that it is raw, which of course is a word that sends convulsions through the FDA. Calf survive. How has any mammal in the universe survived with such a filthy system that is non-FDA approved? How could they do such a thing? Well, because Mother Nature is smarter than the FDA, and she has created this substance, raw milk, which is absolutely amazing. Raw milk contains multiple redundant systems of bioactive components that can reduce or eliminate populations of pathogenic